Imagine a world on the brink of extinction. A once proud civilization, standing at the precipice of annihilation, its towering cities reduced to crumbling ruins, its mighty fleets shattered like brittle glass against an unrelenting enemy. For centuries, they had believed themselves unchallengeable, masters of their domain, rulers of the stars. And yet, in their darkest hour, as the skies burned and their war cries turned to screams, they did something unthinkable. They sent a distress signal, not as conquerors, not as overlords, but as the desperate, terrified remnants of a dying race. The Vordani Dominion had reigned supreme over their sector of the galaxy for more than 3,000 years. Towering insectoid beings with bodies encased in living crystal, their kind had built an empire forged in war and bloodshed, conquering weaker species and absorbing their knowledge, their technology, their resources. Their fleets, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, patrolled the void with unmatched discipline, and their hive-mind coordination made them a force that no rival had ever truly threatened. They crushed resistance with cold efficiency, believing that order and control were the only paths to galactic supremacy. But arrogance is the blindfold of the mighty, and they never considered what might happen if they one day became prey. The first warnings had been subtle, too subtle. A mining outpost going silent, a missing patrol, then a border colony wiped, clean of life, no wreckage, no survivors, just a ghost world adrift in the darkness. The Vordani dismissed these anomalies at first. They had fought countless skirmishes before. Perhaps it was pirates, an internal rebellion, a minor incursion from some desperate faction. They would send a fleet, crush the disturbance, and move on. That was how it had always been. That was how it would always be. But this time was different. The enemy came like a shadow, moving unseen through the void. The Kazul. Their name was barely a whisper in the most ancient records, a legend dismissed as fiction. No one had encountered them before, and lived to tell the tale. Unlike any conventional force, they did not march with banners or demand submission. They did not seek diplomacy, trade, or conquest. They did not negotiate. They only consumed. Worlds fell in silence. Entire armadas vanished without a trace. No debris, no distress calls, just the void swallowing everything whole. The Vordani sent their greatest war fleets, their dreadnoughts bristling with weapons that could crack moons in half. But the Kazul were not an enemy that could be fought with firepower alone. Their warforms were biomechanical nightmares, towering constructs of flesh and metal, adapting in real time to whatever was thrown at them. They bent gravity itself, to their will, their weapons distorting space to rip ships apart at the atomic level. They infected technology, turning machines against their masters. They hijacked minds, bending entire populations into their collective swarm. The Vordani, once so mighty, found themselves powerless. The war wasn't a war at all. It was an extermination. One world fell, then 10, then 100. Each lost in the span of days. The great Vordani war machine, which had stood unchallenged for millennia, was disintegrating before their very eyes. The High Command, in their desperation, did something they had never done before. They called for help. Not just to their allies, to their former enemies, to neutral factions, to anyone who could hear. Their message spread across the galactic networks like a final dying gasp. This is Supreme Warlord Zareth Kwan of the Vordani Dominion. Our empire is under siege. The enemy is beyond comprehension. We cannot hold them back. We offer technology, resources, anything in exchange for aid. We are the last line before the Kazul spread further. If we fall, you will be next. It was a message of desperation, sent to every civilization that still had ears to listen. The Vordani had never begged before, but now they had no choice, and the galaxy remained silent. No empire, no federation, no coalition dared to answer. They had all seen what the Kazul could do. Even the strongest fleets had no hope against them. The other galactic powers knew that the Vordani had been untouchable once, but now they were doomed, and no one wanted to be next. The Vordani had spent centuries ruling with an iron grip, and now, in their moment of greatest need, they reaped the consequences. Their empire had no true allies, only vassals who had longed to see them fall. But then, an answer came. A single transmission, simple, Direct. We have received your distress call. Stand by. The Vordani Command Council stared at the message in disbelief. A response? Who in their right mind would dare intervene? They checked the source. Not from one of the great empires, not from a dominant power in the galactic core. The transmission came from the Orion Arm. A system marked in the records as Sol. A system belonging to a race the Vordani had deemed insignificant. Humans. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY Chronicles-849 is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. The Vordani had encountered humans long ago, centuries before their distress call. Back then, they had seen nothing remarkable in them. A primitive, fragile species barely reaching beyond their homeworld, playing with technology they barely understood. Reckless, short-lived, weak. The Vordani had not even bothered to conquer them. They weren't worth the effort. But things had changed. Humanity had not faded into obscurity. They had not been crushed by the weight of the galaxy. Instead, they had learned, adapted, evolved. And now, when the Vordani's once great allies turned their backs, the humans came. But the question was no longer whether humanity could help. The real question was whether the Vordani truly understood what they had just unleashed, because they had called for salvation, and they had no idea who was coming. The Vordani High Command sat in stunned silence, their elongated crystalline bodies shimmering with confusion and unease. A response had come, one that none of them had expected. Humanity. For a species so seemingly insignificant, their name now carried an unsettling weight. The Vordani had long since catalogued their existence in the vast archives of the Dominion, but their records painted a picture of a species barely worthy of note. When last the Vordani had encountered them, humanity had been nothing more than an upstart civilization, a fledgling race taking its first uncertain steps beyond its home. System. No grand armadas, no superweapons, no vast colonies stretching across the stars. At the time, the Vordani had barely even acknowledged their presence. Conquering them would have been a triviality, but why bother? Humanity lacked the resources, the technological might, or the strategic positioning to be of any significance to the Dominion's grand designs. So, the Vordani had simply ignored them. But now, in the shadow of their imminent extinction, the Vordani were forced to reckon with the bitter irony of their own arrogance. Humanity had survived. Not only had they survived, but they had thrived, expanding, evolving, and more importantly, advancing. And now, in their moment of desperation, when every major galactic power had turned a blind eye, the ones who had once been dismissed as insignificant had answered the call. Yet, Supreme Warlord Zareth Kwan could not shake the gnawing doubt growing within his mind. This had to be some kind of joke, a cruel mockery. The Khazul had torn through the most advanced fleets in the galaxy as though they were made of paper. The Vordani, who had dominated the stars for over 3 millennia, had been reduced to a desperate, crumbling remnant in a matter of months. If the mightiest fleets could not stand against them, then what could the humans possibly offer? Still, with their backs against the wall, they had no choice. "Send a response," Zareth Kwan ordered, his voice laced with tension. "Request details on their fleet strength, their weapons, their deployment capabilities. If they are coming, we must know what they bring to the war front." His command was obeyed immediately. A message was sent, encoded in the Dominion's most sophisticated diplomatic channels, and then they waited. Minutes turned to hours. Hours turned to an entire planetary cycle. And then, without warning, the human response came. It was not a fleet roster, not a list of available warships or combat divisions, no weapon specifications, no proposed strategies, no grand tactical overview. It was simply a set of coordinates, a location on the very edge of Vordani space, just beyond the ruins of one of their most recently fallen worlds. Accompanying the message was a simple statement: "Meet us here, and watch." Zareth Kwan and his remaining war council debated endlessly over the meaning of the message. Was it a trap, a trick, some final humiliation before their extinction? But in the end there was no alternative. The Dominion had no more. Time for caution. A single remaining battlecruiser, heavily damaged but still operational, was dispatched to the coordinates with Zareth Quan himself on board. If this was to be their final gambit, then the Supreme Warlord would see it with his own eyes. As they approached the designated rendezvous point, the remains of the fallen world drifted into view. Once a thriving Vordani colony, it was now nothing more than an irradiated husk. Scorched cities reduced to skeletal ruins, its atmosphere thick with the residual echoes of annihilation. The Kazul had been thorough. No life remained. Nothing to reclaim. Nothing to salvage. And yet, as their sensors stretched out into the void, something was there. At first it was barely a whisper on their instruments, an anomaly in the surrounding darkness. But as the battlecruiser drew closer, the true scale of what they were witnessing became clear. They were not alone. A fleet had arrived. But it was unlike any fleet the Vordani had ever seen. They expected the humans to arrive in crude ships, perhaps barely functional warcraft, held together with primitive technology and wishful thinking. But what hung in the void before them defied all expectations. At the heart of the formation loomed an immense vessel, dwarfing even the Vordani's mightiest dreadnoughts. Its hull was not sleek and elegant like the Dominion's own designs, nor was it cumbersome and angular like the war machines of the other major empires. It was something else entirely. An obsidian leviathan, its surface adorned with strange, shifting geometric patterns that pulsed faintly with eerie blue light. Flanking it were dozens of escort ships, each bristling with weapons that their scanners could not even begin to comprehend. Their designs were varied, almost chaotic, some streamlined, others bulky and jagged, but each radiating a silent, terrifying power. And then, the signatures. Not just energy emissions, not just heat or radiation. Something deeper. Something older. Their instruments were detecting gravitational distortions, pockets of reality bending and warping around the human ships, as though the very laws of physics were struggling to contain them. This was not the work of a primitive species. This was something else, something that should not exist. A transmission crackled to life, breaking the stunned silence aboard the Vordani warship. The voice that came through was unmistakably human, but there was something in it that sent a shiver through the crystalline forms of the Vordani command crew, calm, measured, unshaken, as though the Kazul were nothing more than an inconvenience. You wanted help. Watch carefully. And then, the fleet moved, without warning, without hesitation, without ceremony. A ripple tore through space as the human ships surged forward. Their engines left no traditional signatures, no ion trails, no fusion emissions. They simply blinked through the void, defying conventional understanding of momentum and inertia. And as the first Kazul warforms detected the intruders, as the alien horrors turned their attention toward the incoming human vessels, the slaughter began. The Vordani had called for aid. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The destruction that unfolded in the following hours was nothing short of apocalyptic. From the moment the human fleet entered the fray, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. At first, the Kazul were caught off guard. They had already laid waste to entire galactic empires without encountering a single threat capable of posing a real challenge. Their warships, vast, heavily armed leviathans, each one a terrifying testament to their technological supremacy, had obliterated every species they had encountered with overwhelming efficiency. But the humans were something different. As the first Kazul dreadnought opened fire on the approaching human ships, the impossible occurred. Instead of being torn apart by the alien ship's massive energy cannons, the human vessels simply vanished. No explosions, no shrapnel. Just an eerie, silent disappearance. To the Kazul, it was incomprehensible. How could these ships simply disappear? No visual distortion, no trace of energy expenditure. It was as though they had never existed at all. And then, without warning, the Kazul dreadnought systems malfunctioned. Its weapons offline, its shields flickering, its engines sputtering. In the void of space, the huge warship hung like a wounded animal. A hum vibrated through the Vordani command deck, and Zareth Quan's sensors erupted with frantic activity. Another Kazul vessel, the same size and strength as the first, had been reduced to a floating wreck. And it wasn't just a coincidence. From the far side of the battlefield, the human fleet moved again. One moment they were simply gone, and the next they appeared right on top of the enemy ship. The laws of space and time, so carefully measured and observed by every species in the galaxy, seemed irrelevant in the face of the human might. It was then that the Vordani realized this was not just a fight between species anymore. This was a war against reality itself. The Kazul retaliated, firing their advanced plasma beams, launching swarms of weapons, and trying every countermeasure they had honed over millennia of warfare. But the human ships, these impossibly advanced, barely understood vessels, simply danced around every attack like shadows in the dark. The fleet wasn't just powerful in its weapons, it was uncatchable, untouchable. It was a force that bent physics and ignored the very fundamentals of space combat. Each human ship seemed to possess its own singularity, its own pocket of reality in which it moved according to different rules. One moment, a ship would be on the edge of the battlefield, surrounded by Kazul warships, and then the next, it would blink out of existence entirely, only to appear on the other side of the enemy formation, already attacking. They're not just using technology, they're mastering space itself, Zareth Kwan muttered. His voice barely a whisper, as though he feared speaking the truth out loud would somehow make it all more real. The Vordani had been aware of the potential of theoretical space manipulation. The idea of warping gravitational fields, bending light, and distorting matter to create ships capable of bending space. But it was just that, theory. No species had ever come close to making it a reality. Not even the Vordani, with their centuries of advancement, had cracked such a mystery. Yet here, in front of them, humanity had done just that, and they were using it to dismantle the Kazul without breaking a sweat. The human fleet seemed to be everywhere at once, their ships moving in ways that seemed utterly unnatural. A flash of light, a distortion in the fabric of space, and then another Kazul warship would be falling apart. The Kazul retaliated, launching swarms of torpedoes and energy blasts, but it was all in vain. The human fleet was everywhere they weren't, and nowhere they were. And then came the moment that sealed the fate of the Kazul. From the center of the human fleet, the colossal obsidian flagship moved forward. Unlike the smaller ships, this one wasn't flickering in and out of existence. It was advancing with deliberate precision. Its weapons were silent at first, but as it drew closer to the heart of the Kazul armada, the sensors aboard the Vordani flagship began to flicker wildly. For the first time, the Vordani saw the full scope of the human ship's weaponry. A field of energy erupted from the obsidian vessel's bow, folding the very space around it as if it were paper. The space itself seemed to buckle, pulling in every surrounding Kazul ship into a vortex of reality that compressed time and space. In that moment, the battlefield was nothing but a swirling maelstrom of destruction. Entire Kazul warships were crushed and torn apart, as if the fabric of the universe itself had become their executioner. And then, silence. The human flagship drifted to a stop, the wreckage of Kazul ships floating in its wake. No victory cheers, no grandiose displays of triumph. Just cold, relentless efficiency. Zareth Kwan could only watch in horror as the remaining Kazul ships, their communications dead, their weapons useless, began to break apart under the strain of the spatial collapse. One by one, the enemy ships blinked out of existence, swallowed by the unnatural forces unleashed by the human ships. This is impossible, Zareth Kwan said, his voice almost a hiss. The words were no longer just an observation. They were an admission of defeat. The human ships had done what no one thought possible. They had turned the tide in an instant. The Kazul, once an unstoppable force, were now nothing more than a scattered pile of debris. For the first time in what seemed like eternity, the Vordani warlord realized the truth. The humans had not simply answered a call for help. They had come to take command. But they weren't done. Prepare for Phase 2. The human voice crackled across the comms again, utterly calm. The Kazul will not be allowed to leave the system. They will be wiped from existence. And with that, the last remnants of Kazul resistance were erased from the stars. The fall of the Kazul was not just a military defeat. It was a revelation. The human fleet had demonstrated an unprecedented level of control over space itself. something that no one, not even the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, had ever dared to believe possible. And yet, here it was, in front of their eyes, an entirely new force capable of shattering the very laws of the universe. As the remnants of the Khazul forces vanished into nothingness, the Vordani were left to grapple with the aftermath. For centuries, they had been the most feared and respected military faction in the galaxy. They had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, and their own dominance had been unquestioned. Now, for the first time, they faced the unsettling reality that there was a power greater than their own, one that had not only wiped out an enemy, but had redefined the very nature of combat and reality itself. Zareth Kwan, the Vordani warlord, paced the command deck of his flagship. His mind raced as he processed what had just happened. He could barely comprehend the scale of the defeat, the sheer audacity of the human fleet's capabilities. The Khazul had been crushed in a matter of hours, their immense warships reduced to little more than floating debris. Yet the most chilling part wasn't the devastation. It was the feeling that this had been only a small taste of what humans were truly capable of. "They've only just begun," Zareth Kwan muttered under his breath. He had once thought his enemies were conquerable. But now, with humanity's involvement, the galaxy was irrevocably changed. To the Vordani, the most frightening aspect of this new force was its unpredictability. The human ships didn't just fight. They manipulated the very structure of reality to suit their needs. The way they controlled space itself was something that no race had ever dreamed of achieving. It wasn't just advanced technology. It was mastery over the fundamental forces of existence. The way they could move through the battlefield as if time itself was their ally, disappearing and reappearing at will. No one had ever seen anything like it. The implications were staggering. The human fleet had not only defeated a superior enemy, but they had done so without taking any significant losses themselves. Their technology, their tactics, their understanding of the universe, they were on a level that no one could comprehend. "It's not just technology," Zareth Kwan said aloud. "It's a new form of warfare, one that challenges the very foundation of existence." As if to drive the point home, the human flagship sent a transmission to the remaining Vordani warships, those that had been on the edge of the system, too far to engage in the initial battle. "This is your final warning," the human voice echoed. Across the communications channels, the tone steady and unwavering. "Surrender now, or face the consequences. There is no place in this universe for your kind anymore." The message was clear. The Khazul were not just defeated, they were eradicated, their presence in the galaxy nullified. And now, the Vordani had a choice: bend to the will of humanity or risk the same fate. It was an ultimatum that no one had ever expected. For the first time in their long history, the Vordani were faced with a true existential threat. Not from a rival empire, not from a powerful military force, but from a species that was so advanced, so completely beyond anything they had ever known, that the concept of resistance seemed futile. The Vordani warlord stood before his command deck, watching as the last Khazul ship blinked out of existence. The destruction was total. The galaxy was no longer the same place it had been just days ago, but Zareth Kwan wasn't a leader who simply surrendered. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, he refused to let his people fall without a fight. And yet, a chilling question lingered in the back of his mind. Could the Vordani truly defeat a force that could bend space, manipulate time, and erase entire fleets with the flick of a switch? The answer was unclear, but one thing was certain. He had to make a choice. He turned to his officers. "Prepare the fleet for evasive maneuvers," he ordered. "If we're going down, we'll do it on our terms." But even as he spoke those words, a cold reality settled in. The Vordani might have the strength and the will to fight, but they had never faced an enemy like this before. The humans had shown that they could not only win, they could erase the very concept of victory from their enemies, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. Meanwhile, on the human flagship, the commanders were already making their preparations. The war was not over, not by a long shot. Humanity's victory over the Khazul had merely opened the door to something even bigger: the complete restructuring of galactic order. There was now an undeniable truth in the galaxy. Humanity was not just a player in this cosmic game. They were the new rulers. And with that realization came a new responsibility. Humanity's rise was no accident. It was a force of nature, a power too great to ignore. The Vordani were just the first to learn that lesson. Now, it was time to teach the rest of the galaxy. "This is only the beginning," the human fleet commander said, his voice calm but heavy with purpose. "No one can hide from us anymore. We will reshape this galaxy in our image." As the final remnants of the Kazul disappeared into the void, humanity's grip on the galaxy tightened. There was no turning back now. The era of human supremacy had begun, and all who stood in their way would face the consequences. As the human fleet tightened its hold over the galaxy, the reverberations of their victory began to ripple outward, shaking the very foundations of interstellar politics. The Vordani, once the unquestioned giants of the galaxy, were now in disarray, reeling from their first taste of defeat in millennia. The Kazul, once considered an unstoppable force, were gone. And everywhere, civilizations, large and small, watched, in growing terror and awe as humanity's influence spread. For the first time, an uneasy alliance began to form between the most unlikely of allies. Long-standing enemies, fearful of the human threat, started to consider working together in an attempt to push back against the rising human power. The Vordani, though battered and broken, refused to accept their fate. Desperation led to dangerous decisions that would set the stage for a conflict unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. In the inner chambers of the Vordani High Command, Zareth Kwan, now the leader of the fractured warlord faction, met with his top generals. The losses they had endured were staggering, and their forces were scattered and uncoordinated. Yet their pride remained unbroken. "They think they've won," Zareth Kwan growled, staring out at the viewscreen showing the black void of space. "But we still have the will to fight. We'll unite what remains of our fleet, forge new alliances, and we will bring them down." His officers remained silent, the weight of their situation sinking in. The idea of joining forces with the Kazul or other factions was not one they took lightly, but desperate times called for desperate measures. "The humans may have defeated the Kazul, but they've underestimated us," Zareth Kwan continued, turning back to his commanders. "They are not invincible, and if they think we'll kneel, they are gravely mistaken." Despite the fear gnawing at the edges of his own mind, Zareth Kwan's words struck a chord. The Vordani had never known a foe like the humans, relentless, resourceful, and terrifyingly powerful. But their resolve, forged over millennia of conquest, still burned. The galaxy had underestimated them for centuries, and they were not about to let the humans do the same. "We will strike before they can regroup," he ordered. "Prepare the fleet. We'll meet them head-on and make them realize that the Vordani are not so easily erased." But the humans, for all their incredible power, were not without their own struggles. As their fleets expanded and their influence stretched across star systems, they were forced to confront the harsh reality of what it meant to control the galaxy. The sudden surge of power, while exhilarating, was not without its complexities. How could they maintain order in a galaxy so large, with so many competing interests and ancient grudges? And who would stand beside them in this new era of domination? Humanity had become the uncontested ruler of the galaxy. But who could they trust to stand alongside them in the coming days of uncertainty? It was not long before the first signs of rebellion began to surface. Small factions, former allies of the Kazul and Vordani, began to stir in the shadows, planning their resistance. These factions were not yet strong enough to directly challenge the human fleet, but they were enough of a nuisance to create instability in certain sectors. Yet, the true threat was not in these smaller forces. It was in the realization that the galaxy itself might not be ready for the kind of rule humanity envisioned. Despite their incredible military might, humans were untested as the true leaders of an empire on this scale. The Vordani, the Kazul, and other factions had ruled with an iron fist for eons, driven by conquest and fear. But humanity's philosophy. Here are 5 detailed image prompts based on the script. Foil. Human delegation at the summit. Prompt. A highly detailed and cinematic image of General Eli Vance standing at the center of a massive futuristic summit hall. The chamber is vast, with high-tech architecture, A glowing holographic map of the galaxy in the background, and delegates from various species gathered around. The light from the map casts subtle reflections on the polished floor, while soft, volumetric lighting highlights the tension in the room. General Vance, in a formal military uniform, stands tall with a determined yet calm expression, his face showing signs of battle-hardened experience. His uniform is intricately designed with detailed textures, reflecting the advanced technology of humanity. The room is filled with representatives of different alien species, some with elaborate armor and others in flowing robes, each with distinct features, ranging from armored reptilian beings to sleek humanoid figures. The emotional intensity of the scene is palpable, with eyes fixed on Vance, awaiting his words. The Kazul delegation's withdrawal. Prompt. A cinematic, photorealistic depiction of the Kazul delegation storming out of the summit hall. Their leader, Zarek, is in the foreground, a towering, battle-scarred figure wearing a dark, ornate battle suit with glowing elements. His face is a mixture of defiance and anger, with detailed skin textures showing the strain of battle and age. The Kazul members are large, imposing figures in combat gear, with sharp features and intimidating expressions. The hall is filled with dramatic shadows and soft backlighting from the luminous summit screens. The floor is reflective, capturing the intense emotions in their departure. The tension in the room is palpable as the other delegates watch in disbelief, the contrast between Zarek's defiance and the peaceful ideals of the summit highlighted by the cinematic lighting. The climactic moment. General Vance's speech. Prompt. A high-stakes, cinematic shot of General Vance delivering his impassioned speech to the summit delegates. The scene is set in a grand futuristic hall, with sleek, high-tech architecture surrounding him. The room is dimly lit, but a single beam of soft, ethereal light illuminates Vance, emphasizing his figure in a powerful and dramatic way. The background shows a holographic representation of the galaxy, with planets and star systems orbiting slowly. Vance's uniform is incredibly detailed, with reflective textures, showing signs of wear and battle. His face is expressive, conveying strength and resolve. The delegates, including alien species in various attire, watch intently, their faces filled with curiosity, tension, and hope. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation, and the room's lighting creates a dramatic contrast between light and shadow. The quiet aftermath of conflict. Prompt. A reflective, photorealistic scene of General Vance standing alone on a balcony overlooking the vast cityscape of Tyros. The sky is filled with swirling clouds and the faint glow of distant stars casting an ominous yet hopeful tone on the scene. The city below is vast, with towering structures, lit from within, creating a stark contrast with the surrounding darkness of space. Vance, still in his military attire, is looking out over the horizon, his face marked by the weight of leadership. His posture is solemn, and his expression is one of contemplation. The lighting is cinematic, with soft shadows on his face, capturing a moment of reflection. The environment is highly detailed, with slight rain adding texture to the scene, and subtle reflections on the balcony's surface. A moment of hope amid tension. Prompt. A highly detailed, emotional scene of Commander Silra from the Andaran Coalition standing tall and resolute at the summit, addressing the room with calm authority. She is a tall, ethereal figure with intricate robes that shimmer with the glow of subtle energy patterns. Her expression is one of quiet strength, with an intense gaze that conveys wisdom and determination. The background shows the glowing holograms of the galaxy and star systems, while delegates from other species are seated behind her, listening with rapt attention. The lighting is soft yet dynamic, with beams of light casting delicate shadows on her face and robes. The texture of her skin is realistic, with slight imperfections that add to the authenticity of the scene. The atmosphere in the room feels charged, the air thick with a sense of turning points and potential alliances. These prompts are designed to immerse the viewer in the world of your narrative, capturing the emotional intensity and complexity of the characters and settings in the story. As humanity's influence stretched further across the galaxy, the stakes grew higher. The delicate balance between the species within the galaxy teetered on the edge of a knife. The newly formed human empire, born of victory, was facing its first, true test. How would it manage the delicate web of intergalactic diplomacy, balancing old rivalries and newly forged alliances while holding on to the values they had fought so hard to protect? The humans knew the weight of their responsibility. Their rise to power had been rapid, and with it came not just admiration, but fear. Across the stars, whispers grew louder about the new order. Some saw the humans as liberators, beacons of hope to those oppressed by ancient warlords, while others viewed them as an uncontrollable force, a threat to the balance of power. In the far reaches of space, some of the older civilizations that had lived in peace for millennia began to question the true intentions of humanity. Could a species so young really be trusted with such vast power? But humanity's leaders, veterans of wars, fought on countless worlds, understood that their empire would never be free from challenge. Political maneuvering, alliances, and diplomacy would be just as critical to their survival as the might of their warships. It became evident that, despite their overwhelming military might, humanity's real strength would come from their ability to unite the galaxy. But how could they bring peace to a galaxy so fractured, so filled with ancient grudges and divisions? Humanity's first true test came in the form of a diplomatic summit. A council of representatives from every major species, from the peaceful Andarans to the mysterious and powerful Urani, was convened to discuss the future of the galaxy. The event, known as the Concordia Summit, was set to take place on the neutral world of Tyros, a planet far from any major galactic power. Tyros had long been regarded as a symbol of unity and peace, and its location, on the edge of explored space, offered a neutral ground for the negotiations. The summit was humanity's chance to prove that they were more than just conquerors, that they could lead with wisdom and justice, not just power. It was a delicate balancing act. At the same time, factions within humanity's own ranks grew uneasy with the idea of sharing power, especially with species that had once been their enemies. Was it truly wise to extend the olive branch to the Vordani, or was it a mistake to trust those who had tried to destroy them? As the day of the summit approached, tensions between the galactic powers reached a boiling point. The Vordani, though defeated, had not relinquished their pride. Led by Zareth Kwan, they sent a delegation, but their intentions were not entirely clear. Were they there to negotiate, or was it just another trap? Would they honor their word, or would they use the summit as a means of gathering intelligence for another assault? Meanwhile, the Khazul, having regrouped and rebuilt their forces in secret, were keeping a close eye on the proceedings. They, too, had sent representatives to the summit, but it was known that their ultimate goal was to ensure humanity's downfall. The Khazul had never truly accepted the idea of a galaxy ruled by anyone other than themselves. The notion of human dominance was an affront to their ancient code. But for now, they were biding their time, watching and waiting. Humanity's delegation, led by General Eli Vance, a hero of the war against the Khazul, was ready for anything. Vance had seen the horrors of battle and understood that diplomacy was just another battlefield, one that required just as much strategy and decisiveness. He knew that, in the end, the survival of humanity's empire depended on these negotiations. The fate of the galaxy was in their hands, and he couldn't afford to fail. The opening day of the Concordia Summit was filled with high tensions and even higher expectations. Representatives from every species took their seats in the Grand Hall of Tyros's Parliament, an ancient structure designed to accommodate the vast diversity of its guests. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken challenges, alliances teetering on the edge of collapse, and old grudges simmering beneath the surface. Vance stepped forward to address the assembly. The hall fell silent. His voice carried the weight of history. "We stand here today at the crossroads of the future," Vance began, his eyes scanning the assembly. "The galaxy has been shaped by countless forces, the rise and fall of empires, the clash of ideologies, and the endless cycle of war. But today, we have a choice. We can continue down the path of division and conflict, or we can begin a new chapter. A chapter of unity, of cooperation, and of a galaxy built on the shared strength of all our peoples." His words resonated with some, but not all. There were murmurs from the Vordani delegation, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. The Khazul, as always, remained stoic, their deep-set eyes betraying no emotion. But it was the Urani who were the most intriguing. Ancient and enigmatic, the Urani had remained distant from galactic politics for millennia. Known for their advanced technology and their philosophical pursuit of knowledge, they had never shown interest in power. Yet, as the humans spoke, it was clear that they were watching closely. Their emissary, a tall, ethereal figure named Zyron, rose slowly from their seat. Their voice, calm and deliberate, rang through the hall. "Humanity speaks of unity," Zyron said. "But can you truly build something that lasts? Or will the cycle of conflict return? The galaxy is old, and its wounds run deep. Are you prepared to heal them? Or are you merely another force to add to the endless war?" The room fell into an uneasy silence as Zyron's words hung in the air. Their question cut to the heart of the matter. Could humanity, for all its achievements, break the cycle of destruction that had plagued the galaxy for eons? Or were they simply another empire, destined to fall like all the others? As the summit continued, discussions turned heated. The Vordani, though bruised, were unwilling to concede their power. The Kazul, always calculating, were biding their time, making subtle moves in the background. The Urani, though wise, offered little in terms of actionable support. And humanity. Humanity found itself caught between the ideals it had fought for and the harsh realities of the galaxy. In the end, the Concordia Summit would not be a quick fix. It would be a long and arduous process. But one thing was certain. The future of the galaxy was in flux, and humanity's place in it would be determined not by their strength alone, but by their ability to navigate the complex web of alliances, enmities, and histories that defined the galaxy. The galaxy was watching, and the humans, for all their power, had a long way to go before they could claim their place as the true rulers of the stars. The final day of the Concordia Summit arrived with a heavy air of anticipation. Every leader, every representative, and every species who had gathered here knew that this moment could change the course of history. The galaxy was waiting for a sign of the future, a future that could either be defined by cooperation or swallowed by chaos. Humanity, for all its military might and rapid rise to power, was now walking a fine line between becoming the harbinger of a new galactic order or another failed empire that fell under its own weight. In the days following the initial speeches, the summit had turned into a battleground of ideologies. Tensions continued to rise, and as the discussions delved deeper into the specifics of alliances and mutual cooperation, it became clear that not everyone was here for peace. The Vordani delegation, though outwardly cooperative, had made no secret of their intent to rebuild their strength and reclaim lost power. Meanwhile, the Kazul delegation played the game of diplomacy like seasoned chess players, using every word and action to test humanity's resolve. General Eli Vance, who had remained calm and diplomatic throughout the summit, found himself in increasingly difficult conversations with his own people. There were factions within humanity's ranks that were tired of negotiations, tired of diplomacy. They believed the galaxy would never be at peace unless humanity imposed its will on every star, every world. Their voices were growing louder, pushing for a more aggressive approach. It was clear that there were those within the human delegation who were more than ready to abandon the summit's fragile peace and let their warships do the talking. But Vance understood the stakes. He knew that the outcome of this summit was not just about survival. It was about ensuring that humanity's new order wasn't one of endless war, but one of peace through strength. This was about proving that humanity could be a force for more than just destruction. It could be a beacon of hope, a guiding light for the galaxy's future. As the final session of the summit began, General Vance rose to speak once more, his presence commanding attention in the vast hall. The chamber fell silent as his voice echoed throughout. "We have been given a choice," he said, his tone calm but resolute. "We can continue as we have, fighting endless wars, watching the galaxy tear itself apart, or we can forge something new. Yes, we've come to this summit with power, but that power is not meant to be wielded in the darkness of war. It is meant to be wielded in the light of unity. We must choose to be the architects of a new future, one where cooperation and peace are not just ideals, but realities." Vance's words were bold, but his speech struck a chord with the delegates. Even the stoic Urani shifted slightly in their seats. The Vordani, who had once been brimming with defiance, now seemed hesitant, unsure of their next move. But it was the Khazul delegation that remained eerily silent, their leader, Zarek, observing the humans with an unreadable expression. And then, as the minutes stretched on and the silence thickened, something unexpected happened. A representative from the Andaran coalition, a species known for their neutrality and cautious diplomacy, rose. Their name was Commander Silra, and her species had long been the bridge between conflicting powers in the galaxy. Her voice rang out with a clarity that cut through the tension. "General Vance speaks of unity, of peace through strength," Silra said, her eyes sweeping across the room. "And we have seen what humanity has done in the name of that strength. But let me ask you all, how many of us have the will to see this through? How many are willing to lay down our weapons and trust in each other? This is not just about humanity's future. This is about all of us. The galaxy has suffered enough." Her words caused ripples among the representatives, and for the first time in days, the mood in the hall shifted. Silra's words had brought forth the universal truth that resonated. With all the species present, the galaxy was tired of war, tired of conflict. It was time for something new. As the summit continued, Vance found his position increasingly challenged, but also increasingly validated. Slowly, other species began to speak out in support of his vision. The Urani, despite their distrust of human power, acknowledged the possibility of cooperation. The Andarans, once cautious but pragmatic, offered their resources in exchange for peacekeeping roles in regions of the galaxy still ravaged by war. Even the Vordani, who had once vowed to rebuild their empire at any cost, found themselves in a position of making a difficult decision. Either they would be isolated, considered enemies of the peace, or they would join the effort, acknowledging humanity's power as a force for stability. The Khazul, however, remained unmoved. Their delegation made no further offers, nor did they make any attempt to soften their stance. They were simply watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Their silence spoke volumes, and it was clear that despite the summit's progress, the Khazul still considered humanity a threat. They were not ready to accept a future where they were not the dominant force in the galaxy. With the summit drawing to a close, Vance stood once more, his eyes scanning the room. "We have arrived. At a moment of truth," he said. "The choice is now in our hands. The future of the galaxy lies not in the hands of warlords or conquerors, but in the hands of those willing to step forward and choose peace. Let us prove that we are the ones capable of shaping a future where all species can coexist, where strength is tempered by wisdom, and where the mistakes of the past do not define us." And then, as the room waited with bated breath, the Khazul made their move. Zarek stood, his voice booming across the hall. "You may speak of unity, of peace, but know this, General Vance, our people will never bow to anyone. If you think we will allow you to rule the stars, you are gravely mistaken." With those words, the Khazul delegation stormed out of the summit. And just like that, the delicate peace that had been forged over the last few days began to crack. The galaxy was not ready for peace. Not yet. But as Vance and his allies looked around the hall, they knew the road ahead would not be easy. Still, they had taken the first steps. Humanity had shown the galaxy that it was capable of more than war, and the seeds of a new era had been planted. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity had not just won a war. They had begun to win the galaxy's heart. As the summit came to a close, General Vance gazed into the stars beyond, Tyros's atmosphere, knowing that this was only the beginning. The journey of peace would be long, but they had taken the first step, and the galaxy would never be the same. The question remained, would humanity be able to hold this fragile peace, or would the weight of the galaxy's conflicts tear it apart? What will the future hold for humanity in this vast, unpredictable galaxy? The answer, perhaps, is still waiting to be written.